So thanks for tuning in for part 2. And let me go ahead and continue. The women who were working in these factories, they were working in basically sweatshops. This was during the industrial age, middle of the 20th century, 1940s. They were working in factories doing the work that men used to traditionally do. And, by the way, that tradition wasn't that long either. Okay, the industrial age, I don't know, may have been 100 years. Before that, everybody was on a farm. So you have to understand how this progression worked. There's a time everybody was on a farm and everybody kind of knew their roles here in the United States. Genders had their places and their roles fit pretty neatly with the wiring in the head and in the hearts of people, the way they were designed. The work was divided, the labor was divided. Women did hard work too, but they weren't doing the kind of hard work that the men were doing as farmers. Okay? Women assisted. They did a lot of hard work. They worked a lot harder than they do today. But the society itself was predicated on the principle that men were the heads and women were their helpers. Now, those of you who believe in the Bible basically says the same thing. Now, I know you guys who believe in the Bible are on this, that you're on a lot of people, I'm not going to say everyone, but a lot of people who believe in the Bible have lots of different takes on what that means and what that meant. I'm not here to argue that point. All I know is that in Scripture, it's pretty articulate, pretty well spelled out, the order of things. I think it goes something like this. Christ is the head of man, man is the head of woman. God is the head of Christ, Christ is the head of man, and man is the head of woman. And then you can go to in the book of Genesis and read all about Adam and Eve and the consequences for Eve's sin. So, no need to argue with me. I'm just a messenger. Read the books for yourself. If you don't believe them, that's fine. The truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter what I say. What's happening is happening, and it's observable. Everything that I'm saying here is not just a matter of opinion. You can go and check it out by opening your eyes and just looking around the way society operates today and the way people operate today. Women make better than, something like 75% of the buying decisions for the household, and children make a huge percentage of them too. Men have been, even though men are still earning the lion's share of the income in the households where there's both men and women. Women are making all the purchasing decisions, even though it's with the man's money. So I'm not going to go down a MGTOW road and start to defend that whole agenda. But there's a lot of veracity to it. There's a lot of credibility to the arguments that can't be ignored by a person who's reasonable and rational and using logic, observation, and really looking at the facts. But everybody is entitled to their opinion, even if their opinion is wrong, right? You can't have two opposing views, though, or what one will call a contradiction, and both things be correct. Either one is a lie, and the other one is correct, or both of them are lies, or are in error. Back to my point. So today, here we are, 50, 60, 70 years later, because we went from the industrial age, let's push forward a little bit, to, they call that suffrage period, women's suffrage. And women started petitioning for the right to vote, the right to work, the right to be liberated from their aprons and from their from the restriction from working in what was once called male-dominated jobs. Sorry about the lighting. So let's fast forward a little bit in history, because this is a progression. And if you really want to entertain yourself, go and just look at Google how women and men dressed, and then look at the 40s, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way up to the present day, and just look at how men and women went from clothing styles, women wearing dresses and skirts and stockings, etc., and bonnets and covering their hair, and at the beach they were, largely wearing one-piece swimsuits, etc. And just watch the progression and ask yourself this question: were people just smarter? Are people smarter now than they were then? Is that what it is? The truth of the matter is, people aren't smarter now than they were then. There's a small percentage of people who are smarter now, but the majority of people are just more technically adept. They're not any more smarter. As a matter of fact, if you go and read a book from the turn of the century, I'm talking about the 20th century, 1900s, and read the language from a book written in that era, and then read the language in a book written in this era, and you'll see very clearly that the cognitive abilities of people that came before us in America were far more advanced than the cognitive capacities for us today. And that, not even capacities, but just where we are in terms of our literature. Our literature is grossly inferior to that of 100 years ago, and no one can argue that point. People will say, yeah, but we have so many different genres and they're really complex, and I will agree with that. But what I'm saying is that more classics have come out of that era than have come out of this one, and people are still reading those books. Now, one may say, well, we need some time to see what happens with these books. I doubt it. So what you'll see is the denigration and the decline in the understanding of roles, and the roles have always been questioned. This is not a brand new phenomenon. This is a cycle that happens. It happened in Rome, it happened in Greece. Go and read some history, you'll find that women in Greece were, riding bare-breasted on horses, and they wanted to be warriors too, and some were. So I'm not here to try to perpetuate a stereotype about how women used to be and how they are now. What I'm saying is that things happen in cycles, and we're in the process of a cycle of change that happens in lots of different communities through history throughout the world. Whenever we got to the 50s and 60s, you had the civil rights movement that was happening, and the civil rights movement really softened the heart of a lot of Christian households, fervent Christians who believed in the concept that human beings have inalienable rights regardless of their color, etc., and their gender. So what happened? The feminist movement jumped on the coattails of the civil rights movement. I could speak for an hour on this on just that alone, but I won't. Do the research for yourself. They took the momentum of the civil rights movement and utilized it to their interest, suggesting that, they were being oppressed just like people of color were being oppressed. People of color were being oppressed because of their color, and women were being oppressed because of their gender. Whatever side of the fence you stand on, that's cool. Your choice. I'm just breaking down the history of it. I'm not trying to say yay or nay, for or against. I'm just telling you how things have progressed. So now let's move a little bit forward, and the gay rights movement jumped on the bandwagon with the women's liberation movement. Now, the women's liberation movement really technically started, I would say, like in the 40s, maybe even earlier than that. And it just transformed. It was called women's suffrage, and it's called women's liberation movement, and the National Organization of Women was formed and really got a foothold. And then the gay rights movement and feminists all came together to create an incredibly powerful force. And they still are running things today. Those agendas have indoctrinated Americans for the last, 40, 50 years. And in the last 15, 20 years, especially with the advent of, the internet, pornography, and the hedonistic. Some of these words are big for y'all out there. Some of these words are big for you. You might have to pause and write them down. The hedonistic culture that we've become women are now in very powerful positions, even though, and they're on equal ground, even in better positions than men are today. In a lot of arenas where it used to be male dominated, is now female dominated. And that's largely because men have basically created a society that's extremely comfortable and convenient, with machines and tools, vacuums and toasters and refrigerators, air conditioning, and the list goes on, so that, you know, hard labor and whatnot, you know, robotics, assembly lines, etc. Hard labor is not as necessary. As a matter of fact, a lot of jobs for human beings are just being preserved because people need things to do. Machines can do a shot load of this stuff, really. And since like maybe 15, 20 years, when Osimo, which was a humanoid, not quite humanoid, but a robot that was really efficient, came on the scene. Robotics, right now there could be robots in every person's home, but it's just not socially acceptable or affordable yet, and it hasn't been introduced yet. It will be, unless some other force interferes. Now, let me collect myself. That's going to bring us to, so I got to the 50s and 60s, whenever the initiation of the civil rights movement, that pulled us all the way through to today, where, you know, I guess almost 5 or 6 years ago, more than that, 7 or 8 years ago, I told people, I said, there's going to be a response to this feminist movement and this agenda, because there are straight males out there that are going to start feeling a threat. And a lot of them are straight white males, because the fastest growing gay community is in the black community, Latino, Hispanic community. So a lot of straight white males are really upset at what's happening, because their money is being affected, etc. And guess what happened? MGTOW happened. That was the response that I anticipated, and it happened. And here's the thing: MGTOW isn't just a white male thing. It is in the United States, but it isn't just a white male thing, because it's all over the world. There's similar movements in Japan and other nations across the country, but the media won't cover it. Now, let me jump back to the real talk, because I'm laying all this foundation for a reason. So let me jump back to the topic, to the subject at hand, so to remind you of what we're talking about, in case you got lost along the way. And then I'm gonna wrap up this video, and if you want to hear some more, you let me know, or I'll just go ahead and make a video on my own initiative. So today, we are living in an age where the last 15, 20 years easy has been a culture that has been intentionally, by an agenda, powerful people who control the media and who control politics, has been intentionally destroying the family so that they can control people more. Because when you have a strong family unit, you have children and you have grandchildren, and you can build a family, you can build wealth. But when you destroy the family and you got things like, you know, paying child care support, divorces on top of divorces on top of divorces, and mixed families, you get all this confusion. It's very expensive, and there's a lot of litigation. There's a lot of confusion, arguments, and litigation that comes out of it. You know, there's a lot of suing and a lot of going to court, and a lot of people being put in prison behind family matters, of which men used to be the head.